In September 2023, then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau rose in the House of Commons and delivered a statement that sent shockwaves around the world.
Over the past number of weeks, Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen.
The victim, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, was a Sikh separatist involved with the Khalistan movement. Trudeau's announcement sparked a diplomatic explosion, one that was further complicated by allegations that India had engaged in election interference here. The two countries became effectively estranged. At the recent G20, the prime ministers were all smiles as they agreed to resume trade talks. To get a sense of what these trade talks could mean for Canada and whether our history with India could get in the way, I spoke with Rohinton Medhora, a professor of practice at McGill University and a distinguished fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation. Rohinton, welcome to the program. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well.
All right, let's talk with the most recent talks. Canada and India restarted trade talks at the recent G20 in South Africa. What would this trade deal include?
So we don't know, but the one thing we do know is that these talks have a 15-year history of futility. They began as talks for a comprehensive economic partnership, in other words, going beyond trade. They were sort of downgraded to trade, and at the G20 summit, they've been upgraded again to comprehensive economic partnership, which tells me that it will be about trade, but more than trade. How much more, we still don't know, but typically a comprehensive economic partnership would include work on investment, technology, perhaps people flows, education exchanges. It all depends on how we view the word comprehensive.
Is this a turning point? You talk about that 15-year history. Is this a turning point for these two countries when it comes to trade?
There have been many turning points that haven't turned. So I'm not willing to sit down here with you and say this is the turning point. But a few things have changed. Presumably, both countries have learned lessons over the last 15 years of what worked and what didn't. Second, and of course the big one, the geopolitics have changed. And both countries realize that the US-centered world order is not quite what it used to be. That might be the imperative that these talks need for the two countries to take them seriously. But there's a but here, Jeyan, and the but is that neither country is an important trading partner of the other.
Interesting.
And so the incentive to make concessions to each other is low, because then you have to make them to much more important trade partners. And so there's always going to be a caution in the negotiations and a limit to the upside.
Some people might be curious to hear you say that because India, fourth largest economy. So why might it be surprising that they don't necessarily matter to each other?
It has been an underperforming trade relationship. My colleague Dan Syriac has estimated that if the two countries actually traded based on their economic fundamentals, trade might be 1.5 to 2 times as high. The fact that it isn't is a reflection of the constant buffeting of the economic relationship, of the fact that neither country has taken the other, frankly, seriously, despite the rhetoric. The upside is there. I suspect there's more upside in other areas, though.
All right, well, let's talk about that upside. Where do you see the main opportunities here for collaboration?
I'd say the main opportunities would be on the investment side.
Okay.
There is a lot of green infrastructure and other kinds of infrastructure that India needs, which requires both capital as well as technology. And Canadian pension fund money in particular is known to be smart, patient money, exactly the kind that India needs. I think that has been a growth area and almost impervious, by the way, to some of these political trends we've seen. And so that, I suspect, is the main one. Then, of course, there's areas like students, which we know are subject to our immigration policies as well. But I'd say investment on the one hand, and within trade, there's existing trade patterns, which I don't think will deepen, but there might be new areas that emerge. We don't know. It depends on the scope of the talks.
Well, in terms of new areas, there's been some buzz around artificial intelligence as a potential source for bilateral cooperation. Your thoughts?
I'm puzzled by that one,
Why?
actually. I'm puzzled by it for the reason that, I have a sense that the excitement over AI is often inversely proportional to understanding the reality.
Okay.
So to be able to trade something or to consider an economic asset, you have to own it. And to own it, the typical way that we measure that is patents.
Right.
My colleague Jim Hinton has done the numbers on this extremely carefully. And what they suggest, at no surprises, but the AI game is dominated, and by dominated, I mean 80 to 90% of the patents in AI are controlled by US and China. There's about 6 countries, of which Canada is one, so is the UK, South Korea, Japan, Germany, who then vie for that remaining 10%, and Canada's actually at the bottom of that list. We lose more patents than we make to other countries because we don't have the large multinationals that can valorize them. India isn't even a player in that game. It is not in the list I just mentioned, and it has a very impressive digital stack, as you might know. Digital ID, financial inclusion, health, justice, but it's largely open source based. So you've got a country that does not see AI as a purely commercial asset, and one that's a laggard in commercializing. And I don't see how we're going to build an economic relationship on something that isn't even an asset for either. There might be academic exchanges, and as an academic, I'm never against those. But I don't think you need an economic agreement for academics to exchange.
Noted. All right. You mentioned a number of countries already. Outside of these bilateral issues, might there be a greater opportunity for both countries to work on perhaps a multilateral, trilateral, in terms of what we're seeing right now in terms of a shift in global order?
I believe that's the other growth area. It is outside bilateral. Some of us have been saying for years that the G20 is the forum that allows Canada to diversify its foreign policy thinking and actions. As with China, but that's a separate story. Canada and India have an interest in a stable and different global order. We now have a chance to play that role, and everything seems to be up for grabs. Debt, finance, development, trade, technology. This is a good time for Canada and India to join forces with other countries.
They have already. Australia?
And Australia, we've seen an example of that just recently, in which we design experiments among ourselves, perhaps, that can then be multilateralized, or promote big ideas at the multilateral level.
Both countries have been accused, India and Canada, of each other trying to undermine their national security. India has accused Canada of enabling the Khalistan movement here. Canada has accused India of foreign interference. With all of that history and the history that you've talked about, will this impede trade relations?
Historically, it has, and I would never rule out the fact that events will get in the way, so to speak. I don't mean to dismiss the importance of these issues you've raised, but that they would sort of get in the way of the economic relationship. There's 2 areas where I'd be looking out for a bump. Certainly the trial of the suspects in the Nijar murder and the ongoing election interference work. The fact that so many high-level Canada-India contacts have happened suggests to me that perhaps these issues have come up and there's some kind of entente that, let's now compartmentalize. But just because we think it will be compartmentalized doesn't mean it will. A lot depends on what kinds of credible evidence become public and how publics in each country react to it. So I'm not going to rule it out because the history suggests that these are things that always seem to matter in a comprehensive relationship.
To what extent are these renewed trade talks a reflection of shared values between two countries versus a sort of shaped by geopolitical necessity, i.e. U.S. President Donald Trump's policies?
A bit of both. I think there's no question that both countries realize that the U.S. is not the partner and player it used to be. I don't think our two countries would be where they are were it not for that geopolitical development. This said, there has always been an undercurrent in Canadian foreign policy to seek out like-minded. And there's a long and actually happy history of Trudeau Sr. being enamored by the non-aligned movement and his admiration of the Nehru-Gandhi family. There have been moments, Paul Martin championing the expansion of the G7 to include India in the G20 because of his high regard, and vice versa from Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, a former finance minister himself. So there is that warmth, and that warmth comes from shared values. But shared values have to be backed up by action, and that's where the two countries haven't been able to get it together.
All right, with that being said, if you had one piece of advice for the foreign minister, what would that be?
I'd say don't forget the long view. That's not the same as saying take the long view so you don't do anything in the short run. But don't forget the long view, and don't let events always get in the way of the long view. Of course, they have to be dealt with, but Canada, India have a partnership that has not been fully exploited. Start exploiting it.
All right, Rohinton, we are going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.